Hey everyone, my name is Lizzie, and today we'll be talking about everything we need to know about preservatives.
What is a preservative? It's a substance that helps prevent wood, food, and other materials from decaying. For example, salt is a preservative that's been used throughout the centuries. Vinegar and spices as well are considered preservatives. And for those that didn't know, alcohol as well is a preservative. It helps preserve itself. Therefore, it's really hard to have alcohol decaying because alcohol in itself is a preservative. This is why you can leave open alcohol bottles inside your cupboard or your fridge for years without worrying about them. The same thing applies to your beer cans. You can leave them in your pantry for years without worrying about if they will expire. Preservatives can also be found in juice boxes. Typically, when you read the ingredient list, it's those items that we have no idea what they are. For example, sulfites, citric acid, malic acid. It's things that we don't really find at the store. And although all winemakers suggest against using preservatives when making their homebrew, I have used preservatives in order to preserve fresh fruits that I add into my wine or my beer. Therefore, if I squish grapes to make wine, I will add a little bit of preservatives inside to help preserve the grapes. Another alternative would be to put in the grapes in a bag. Therefore, the rotten grapes will not affect your homebrew, or put the squished grapes inside your homebrew and remove them after a few days to make sure the alcohol stays fresh. Although preservatives help preserve fruits and keep the alcohol fresh, preservatives also act against the yeast, and the yeast are the main ingredient to make alcohol. Therefore, there is a little conundrum on these preservatives, and here's what it entails.
Preservatives are usually found in, let's say, Coca-Cola or any other type of soft drinks. However, we're not using these type of drinks to make alcohol. I've tried and it did not work because of the preservatives. And instead, what you want to use is juice. Why juice? Because if you use water, you can make your wine or homebrew with water. However, using juice adds a little tartness, therefore it adds a little flavor to your finished product. And this flavor has usually more texture, it's more diverse than simply water. Although you can make delicious home brews with water alone, I make beer with just water, and I make this sort of cocktail with water as well, and it seems to be a crowd favorite. What I use is simply water, yellow sugar, a little bit of molasses, and EC1118. However, when you want to make wine or you want to make your alcohol taste more on the wine side, therefore red wine or white wine, I suggest using juice because they already have this little tartness, and this in the ingredient list is called malic acid. And malic acid is a preservative. However, I know usually homebrewers say avoid preservatives in your homebrew. However, malic acid is okay. It just shows that there's a little bit of acidity inside your juice. It's also found in fruits. Another type of preservative that you can use when making your homebrew is ascorbic acid. And what this means, it's just a vitamin C, and it's found in apple juice. I've made cider with this type of apple juice, including malic acid and ascorbic acid multiple times, and the fermentation has always gone until the end. And how do you know if the fermentation is done? If it's bubbling this quickly, then the fermentation is probably still going on. However, just to make sure, you can use a hydrometer and a cylinder, and once you pour in the liquid, you drop the hydrometer in and it should float near the top, and when it's done it should be at 0.990 to 1.000, and this will show you that the fermentation is done. And how do you calculate your alcohol percentage? You have to take your starting gravity, which represents how much sugar your homebrew started with, minus your final gravity, which is how much sugar is at the end of the fermentation, and the difference between both is the amount of sugar that the yeast ate. Once you put your water or juice and sugar at the beginning, you take a measurement before adding the yeast. Then you add the yeast, and then the yeast is going to eat all the sugar until there's less and less and less sugar through the weeks. And then once there's less sugar, then you measure it again to know how much sugar is present at the end. And the difference between the sugar at the beginning and at the end, or when the yeast has finished its meal, It's going to determine the percentage of alcohol. There's a little formula. It's the starting gravity minus the final gravity, which is the amount of sugar at the beginning and end, times 131.25. It's a really specific number, but that's what the formula says, and it gives you a percentage of alcohol. And if it's wine, it should vary between 9 to 15%. And if it's beer, it should be around 4 to 8, roughly. And you can always go higher or lower based on your preference. So if you want to go higher, you just add more sugar because there's going to be a higher difference between the beginning of the fermentation and the end. Or if you want to have less alcohol percentage, you add less sugar, and therefore there's less sugar for the yeast to eat. And there's going to be a slight difference between the starting gravity and the final gravity, and it's going to reflect in the percentage of alcohol. If you want to have more information on that, you can book a class. The link is in the description below. We tell you how to calculate your starting gravity, final gravity in a step-by-step process. And going back to the preservatives. So there are preservatives that are not favorable to the yeast. We talked about malic acid, which is the acidity of your juice, and ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C. Those two are fine. However, if your juice includes sulfites, this is a no, and I can guarantee you that the fermentation will not go to the end because the sulfites act against the yeast, and your fermentation will probably end with a lot of sugar left. Therefore, the yeast will leave a lot of sugar behind, and it'll probably be too sweet for your liking. Unless you like that type of sweetness, it'll give you a little bit less alcohol as well, and it's gonna be on the sweeter side. And sulfites also, quick note is that I hear that sulfites affect hangovers. Therefore, if you want to buy wine from the store, it's always good to look for no sulfites because that will not give you a headache the next day. Food for thought. And other types of preservatives, usually preservatives, when you look in the ingredient list, it's the ingredients that we don't understand. And those, if it's acid, for example, if it's other ingredients that you're not sure about, it's probably a preservative. And this is important in juice because it helps keep the items on the shelf longer. However, it's not good for home brewing. Therefore, if you want to make sure that your fermentation goes from the beginning to the end, you can take preservative-free juice. This is what it is here. So it's written on the box, and your fermentation is most likely gonna go from the starting gravity to 0.990 or 1.000, which is the final gravity, because the yeast will have no more sugar to eat at the end. And you wanna make sure that the juice that you're using has a little bit of tartness, a little bit of malic acid or sourness, in order for your alcohol to taste more like wine, more like cider at the end of the fermentation. For beer, however, you do not need this. You can just add water. And the water is not the main factor that influences the taste of beer. This is influenced mainly by the hops. And hops are a plant that you add to make beer. So going back to preservatives, so we have sulfites, which are a no-no, and anything other than malic acid and ascorbic acid, I would stay away from. And malic acid is associated to tartness, acidity, sourness, which is not always good for the yeast because the yeast performs at an optimal pH of 5.2. And when you have too much malic acid, the liquid that you're using could have an acidity of, let's say, 2 pH, 3 pH, which is below 5.2. Therefore, once you're using tart juice or sour juice, you want to increase the pH to the optimal level, which is 5.2. And you could do so by adding calcium carbonate. I add 1 teaspoon at a time to make sure that it goes up incrementally. And 1 teaspoon usually brings it up by 1 pH. Then you mix it around, and once it's at 5, you're good to go, and you can start the fermentation by adding the yeast and yeast nutrients. However, you will not necessarily need this all the time. You just need this for low pH juices and fruits like berries, cherries. However, if you want to use fruits that are a good level of pH, you can use watermelon or mango, and the pH is already at around 5. Therefore, they do not have that much acidity, and you do not need to adjust the pH to help your yeast ferment. Therefore, there's preservatives and there's pH. These are two completely different things, but they can be intertwined when juice is involved, because juice have both pH problems in the sense that they're too acidic, and they can have preservatives, which inhibits the yeast. Therefore, gotta watch out for making juice. However, Once you're able to perfect the juice recipe, it tastes really good. And if you found this video valuable, share with a friend. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.